The morning sun of Kepler 442b cast long shadows across New Haven Colony as Jake Morrison walked through the central plaza. Children ran between the market stalls while their parents bought fresh vegetables from the hydroponic farms. The smell of baking bread drifted from the bakery where Old Man Pete worked every morning, since the colony started 20 years ago. Jake smiled as he watched Amy, his daughter, hurry past with her books toward the university building. She was studying the local plant life and always seemed excited about her classes. Lisa Morrison was already in the agricultural center when Jake arrived at his office. Through the large windows, he could see her talking with the farmers about the new crop rotation. The cornfield stretched beyond the settlement, green and healthy under the alien sun. New Haven had grown from a small outpost to a real city with over 2 million people. Families had children here. Grandparents told stories of Earth, and everyone felt safe. The communication center buzzed with normal daily traffic. Reports came in from the mining stations in the mountains, the fishing boats on the Great Lake, and the research team studying the planet's 3 moons. Everything was routine and peaceful. The colonists had built something beautiful here, something worth protecting. Jake sat at his desk and reviewed the weekly reports. Food production was up 15% from last month. The new water treatment plant was working perfectly. Crime was almost zero except for a few teenagers who had painted graffiti on the school wall. Dr. Sarah Martinez had delivered 3 healthy babies this week. Life was good on New Haven. The first warning came through the emergency channel at exactly 10 in the morning. Admiral Frank Cooper appeared on the main screen, his face serious but calm. Behind him, Jake could see the bridge of the UES Guardian, the warship that protected this sector of space. Admiral Cooper had visited New Haven many times and was friends with many of the colonists. "Jake, we need to talk," Admiral Cooper said. "The Zephyrian Empire has sent messages to all human colonies. They want us to leave our worlds or face what they call consequences." Jake felt his stomach drop. The Zephyrians were known across the galaxy as a military people who took what they wanted. Their ships were fast and their weapons were powerful, but they had never directly threatened human space before. "What kind of consequences?" Jake asked. "They did not say exactly," Admiral Cooper replied, "but Earth Command thinks this is just talk. The Zephyrians know that attacking human colonies would mean war with Earth. They are not stupid enough to start a fight they cannot win." Jake nodded, but still felt worried. He had read reports about what the Zephyrians did to other species. They did not leave much behind when they wanted a planet. "Should we prepare for evacuation?" "No," Admiral Cooper said firmly. "Earth has sent additional ships to this sector. You have my word that New Haven is safe. We will not let anything happen to your people." After the call ended, Jake walked through the colony again. He did not want to cause panic, but he needed to see that everything was normal. The children were still playing in the parks. The shops were busy with customers. Workers were building a new school on the east side of town. Nobody seemed worried about alien threats. That evening, Jake had dinner with Lisa and Amy. They sat on their back porch and watched the sunset paint the sky purple and orange. Amy talked about her research project on the local fungus that helped plants grow faster. Lisa mentioned that the fruit trees would be ready for harvest next month. It felt like any other peaceful evening on New Haven. 3 days later, everything changed. Jake was in a meeting with the town council when his assistant rushed in. Her face was pale and her hands were shaking. "Sir, we lost contact with Admiral Cooper. The Guardian is not responding to our calls." Jake felt ice in his veins. He followed his assistant to the communication center, where technician Bob Williams was trying every frequency. Static filled the speakers. No response came from the Guardian or any other Earthship in the system. "When did this start?" Jake asked. "About an hour ago," Bob replied. Everything was normal, then all signals just stopped. Jake ordered Bob to contact Earth Command directly. The quantum communication system would take several hours to reach Earth, but they needed to report what was happening. While they waited, Jake tried to stay calm. Maybe the ships were just having technical problems. Lisa found Jake in his office later that night. She sat beside him and took his hand. Outside, the colony looked peaceful under the stars. Streetlights illuminated the walkways where a few people still moved around. The night shift workers were heading to the factories. Everything looked normal. "The children are asking questions," Lisa said quietly. "Amy heard some rumors at school about ships disappearing." "I do not know what to tell them," Jake admitted. Admiral Cooper promised we were safe. Earth Command said the Zephyrians were just making threats. Maybe the Admiral is right, Lisa said. Maybe this is just technical problems. Jake wanted to believe that, but something felt wrong. In 20 years of running New Haven, he had never lost contact with the protection fleet for more than a few minutes. The Guardian had the most advanced communication systems in human space. It should not just disappear. The next morning brought terrible news. A scout ship called the UES Discovery arrived in the system. Captain Gary Phillips contacted New Haven immediately. His voice sounded strange, almost shocked. Colony Administrator Morrison, this is Captain Phillips. We came to investigate why your protection fleet stopped reporting to Earth Command. Captain, we lost contact with Admiral Cooper yesterday. Jake replied. Have you found the Guardian? There was a long pause before Captain Phillips answered. Sir, there are no Earthships in this system. We found debris that might be from the Guardian, but not much. It looks like the ships were destroyed. Jake felt the world spinning around him. Destroyed by who? We are scanning for Zephyrian ships now, Captain Phillips said. But sir, we are detecting something else. Long-range sensors show a large fleet approaching your system. They will arrive in approximately 6 hours. How large? Jake asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. At least 300 ships, sir. All of them appear to be Zephyrian military vessels. Jake looked out his office window at the peaceful colony. Children were walking to school. Adults were heading to work. Nobody knew that death was coming from the stars. In 6 hours, everything they had built here might be gone. Captain Phillips, can you evacuate our people? Sir, I have one scout ship. You have over 2 million colonists. There is no time and no way to save everyone. Jake closed his eyes and made the hardest decision of his life. Then you need to leave now and warn Earth. Tell them what happened here. Make sure our families know we fought to protect what we built. Sir, I cannot abandon you. You must, Jake said firmly. Earth needs to know the truth. Go now before the Zephyrians arrive. As Captain Phillips reluctantly departed, Jake gathered his family and the town leaders. He did not lie to them about what was coming. The people of New Haven deserved to know the truth. Some cried, some prayed, and some just held their loved ones close. Amy hugged her father tight. Will Earth come to help us? Jake looked at his brave daughter and smiled. Yes, sweetheart. Earth will remember us. They will make sure this never happens to anyone else. The Zephyrian fleet arrived exactly when predicted. The colonists watched from their windows as alien ships filled the sky like dark clouds blocking the sun. But the people of New Haven did not run or hide. They stood together in the central plaza, holding hands and singing the old songs from Earth. When the end came, it came quickly and completely. Phillips and the crew of the Discovery watched, from a safe distance as brilliant light consumed New Haven. The Zephyrian ships used weapons that did not just destroy buildings or kill people. They erased everything. The colony, the farms, the forest, even the lake where children had learned to swim. When the light faded, Kepler 442b was empty and lifeless, as if humans had never been there at all. The Discovery turned toward Earth, carrying news that would change the galaxy forever. The UES Discovery arrived at Earth 3 days after New Haven died. Captain Gary Phillips had pushed his ship's engines to their limits, racing through space to deliver the terrible news. His crew was silent during the journey, still shocked by what they had witnessed. The images and sensor data from Kepler 442b filled their computer systems like evidence of a nightmare that refused to end. Earth's orbital stations appeared on the view screen as the Discovery approached. Massive space elevators stretched from the planet's surface to the spinning habitats where millions of people lived and worked. Ships moved between the stations like busy insects, carrying cargo and passengers in the peaceful routine of daily life. None of them knew what was coming. Admiral Richard Hayes was in his office at Earth Command when the priority message arrived. He was a tall man with gray hair who had served in the military for 40 years. He had fought in the colonial wars when he was young and had spent the last 20 years keeping the peace. Now he stared at his communication screen as Captain Phillips requested an immediate meeting with the highest levels of government. President Helen Davis arrived at Earth Command within an hour. She was a former colony governor who understood what life was like on the frontier worlds. Her face was serious as she entered the secure briefing room, where Admiral Hayes and the Joint Chiefs of Staff waited. Captain Phillips stood at attention, still wearing his uniform from the long journey. Captain, your message said New Haven colony has been destroyed, President Davis said. Please explain what you mean. Captain Phillips activated the holographic display in the center of the room. The recording from the Discovery's sensors began to play. First, they saw New Haven as it had been. A beautiful world with green fields, sparkling cities, and orbital stations glittering in space. Then came the Zephyrian fleet. Dark ships that moved like predators across the sky. The Zephyrians used weapons we have never seen before, Captain Phillips said, his voice steady despite the horror he was describing. They did not just bomb the colony or kill the people. They erased everything. The planet's surface was completely sterilized. Even the bacteria in the soil was destroyed. The hologram showed the moment of destruction. Brilliant energy beams swept across New Haven like the hand of an angry god. Where they touched, matter simply ceased to exist. Buildings, trees, people, even the ground itself vanished into empty space. When the attack ended, Kepler 442b was a dead rock with no trace that life had ever existed there. How many people lived on New Haven? President Davis asked quietly. 2.3 million citizens, Madam President, Admiral Hayes replied. Entire families, including children who were born there. 3 generations of human settlers who built that world into something beautiful. The room fell silent as the recording ended. General Kate Foster, the head of Colonial Defense, was the first to speak. Do we know why the Zephyrians did this? They sent warnings to all human colonies 3 days before the attack, Captain Phillips said. They demanded that we abandon our worlds. When we refused, they made good on their threats. President Davis stood and walked to the large window that looked out over Earth's blue oceans. Somewhere down there, families were going about their normal lives, not knowing that their government was about to make a decision that would change everything. What is our current military strength, Admiral? Admiral Hayes pulled up the fleet status reports. We have approximately 50,000 active warships of all classes, Madam President. Another 100,000 ships in reserve that could be activated within 6 months. Our industrial capacity could produce additional vessels, but that would take time. How does that compare to the Zephyrian Empire? Intelligence estimates they have around 40,000 frontline ships, General Foster replied. However, their technology is more advanced than ours in some areas, particularly weapons and shields. A straight military confrontation would be costly. President Davis turned back to face the room. Her expression was hard as steel. The Zephyrians have made a fundamental error in judgment. They believe that destroying one colony will frighten us into abandoning all the others. They think we will calculate the cost and choose to retreat. What are your orders, Madam President? Admiral Hayes asked. Contact every shipyard, every manufacturing facility, every orbital platform in human space, President Davis said. I want production increased to maximum capacity immediately. Activate all reserve fleets and recall every ship from patrol duty. Begin mobilizing the colonial militias. General Foster looked surprised. Madam President, that would be the largest military buildup in human history. Are you planning to invade Zephyrian space? President Davis walked back to the holographic display where the empty world of Kepler 442b still rotated slowly. The Zephyrians killed 2.3 million human beings because they thought we would not respond with sufficient force. They are about to learn how wrong they were. Within hours, the news of New Haven's destruction spread across Earth. The government released the sensor recordings to the public, holding nothing back. People saw exactly what the Zephyrians had done to the peaceful colony. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Massive crowds gathered in every major city on Earth. In New York, 10 million people filled the streets demanding justice for New Haven. In London, protesters surrounded the Zephyrian embassy until police moved them back for safety. In Tokyo, citizens held vigils for the dead colonists while calling for military action. The families of New Haven colonists were hit hardest by the news. Sarah Williams had sent her son to New Haven 5 years ago to study agriculture. Now she sat in her living room in Chicago, staring at the last message he had sent just a week before. Tom Davis had built the school system on New Haven and was supposed to visit Earth next month to see his grandchildren. His daughter Mary cried as she watched the recordings of the planet where her father had died. But grief quickly turned to anger. The human species had been peaceful for decades, but they remembered how to fight. Veterans of the old colonial wars came out of retirement and reported to recruiting stations. Young people who had never considered military service signed up in numbers that overwhelmed the processing centers. Commander Steve Parker worked around the clock at Luna shipyards, coordinating the massive increase in production. The orbital factories that had been building civilian vessels were converted to military production. New assembly lines appeared seemingly overnight as humanity's industrial machine shifted into a wartime economy. The asteroid mining stations received new orders to extract materials for ship construction. The Jupiter gas refineries increased fuel production. Mars began manufacturing weapons and armor plating. Every human world contributed to the growing war effort. Dr. Carol Mitchell led the team of scientists who were developing new weapon systems. The peaceful decades had allowed human technology to advance in ways that had never been tested in combat. Quantum computers designed for research were reprogrammed to control targeting systems. Medical scanners were modified to penetrate enemy shields. Even the terraforming equipment used on colonies could be turned into weapons of incredible power. The Zephyrian ambassador requested a meeting with President Davis 1 week after New Haven's destruction. Ambassador Krell was a tall, thin alien with gray skin and large black eyes. He stood in the diplomatic reception hall at Earth Command, surrounded by human officials whose faces showed barely controlled rage. President Davis, the Zephyrian Empire regrets that military action was necessary, Ambassador Krell said in perfect English. However, human expansion into Zephyrian territorial space could not be tolerated. The response was proportionate to the threat. President Davis stared at the alien diplomat for several long seconds. Ambassador, you killed 2.3 million human civilians, including children. You erased an entire world from existence. And you call this proportionate? The humans on that world were warned to leave, Krell replied coldly. They chose to remain in territory that belongs to the Zephyrian Empire. The consequences were made clear. Admiral Hayes stepped forward. Ambassador, New Haven was established 20 years ago in unclaimed space. Your empire had no presence in that system. All space belongs to the Zephyrian Empire until we choose to grant it to lesser species, Krell said. Your people failed to understand their place in the galactic order. President Davis nodded slowly. I see. So in your view, human lives have no value unless your empire grants them permission to exist. That is correct, Krell confirmed. Then let me make our position equally clear, President Davis said. You have declared war on humanity by committing genocide against our people. We accept that declaration. You will discover that we take a very different view of proportionate response. Ambassador Krell seemed surprised by this reaction. President Davis, the Zephyrian Empire has existed for over 1,000 years. We have conquered dozens of species and claimed hundreds of worlds. Humanity is young and small. You cannot hope to stand against our military might. We shall see, President Davis replied calmly. Admiral Hayes, please escort the ambassador to his ship. His diplomatic immunity ends in 1 hour. As the Zephyrian diplomat left Earth, he had no idea what was already beginning to happen across human space. In shipyards from Mercury to Neptune, new wars. The Zephyrians had made their calculations based on what they thought they knew about humanity. Their intelligence reports showed that Earth maintained a modest fleet for colonial protection and trade route security. 50,000 active warships seemed like a reasonable force for a species that controlled only a few dozen star systems. What the Zephyrian analysts failed to understand was the difference between a peacetime military and a species fully committed to war. Deep in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, facilities that had been dormant for 30 years suddenly came to life. The Ceres military complex had been built during the last colonial conflict, but was mothballed when peace agreements were signed. Now it awakened like a sleeping giant, its automated systems responding to emergency activation codes that had not been used in decades. Admiral Peter Grant stood on the observation deck of the Ceres complex, watching as massive assembly bays opened for the first time in a generation. Each bay was large enough to build dreadnought-class warships, the kind of vessels that could crack planets or stand against entire fleets. Robotic workers moved with mechanical precision, following construction patterns that had been stored in quantum computers for decades. How many ships can this facility produce per month? Admiral Grant asked his chief engineer. At full capacity, sir. We can complete 12 heavy cruisers or 4 dreadnoughts every 30 days, Commander Beth Turner replied. That is just this complex. We have similar facilities at Vesta, Pallas, and the Jupiter orbital stations. Admiral Grant nodded as he watched the first new hull take shape in the construction bay. And how long has this facility been operational? 72 hours, sir. The automated systems began construction the moment we transmitted the activation codes. What amazed Admiral Grant was not just the speed of construction, But the advanced technology being built into these new ships, humanity had not been idle during the peaceful decades. Research and development had continued in universities and corporate laboratories across human space. Weapons that existed only as theoretical concepts were now being installed on warships designed to use them. Captain Alex Turner received his assignment to command the heavy cruiser UES Retribution while the ship was still being built. He stood in the shipyard watching robotic arms install the vessel's quantum torpedo launchers and gravitational manipulation systems. The weapons were so advanced that the targeting computers required artificial intelligence just to operate them properly. "Captain, your ship will be ready for launch in 6 days," the shipyard supervisor told him. "The crew is already being assembled from volunteers across the fleet." Captain Turner reviewed the technical specifications on his datapad. The UES Retribution was twice as large as the ships he had commanded before, with weapon systems that could destroy targets from incredible distances. "How many ships like this are being built?" "This design? About 3,000, sir. But there are also the battleships, the carriers, the destroyers, and the specialized assault vessels. The total production across all facilities is classified, but I can tell you it is beyond anything in recorded history." Meanwhile, on Luna, Dr. Carol Mitchell was putting the finishing touches on humanity's newest weapon systems. The quantum disruption array could tear apart the molecular bonds in enemy ships from light years away. The gravitational compression bomb could create artificial black holes that would consume entire fleets. These were not just improvements on existing technology. They were completely new ways of waging war. "Dr. Mitchell, are you certain these weapons will work against Zephyrian ships?" asked General Kate Foster during her inspection of the weapons facility. "General, we have tested them against every type of armor and shielding known to exist," Dr. Mitchell replied. "The Zephyrians use quantum phase shields that can deflect conventional energy weapons. Our new systems operate on different principles entirely. Their shields will be useless." General Foster watched as the new weapons were loaded onto transport ships for distribution to the growing fleet. "How long before every ship in our Navy has these upgrades?" "Installation teams are working around the clock, General. Within 2 weeks, every human warship will carry weapons that the Zephyrians have never encountered before." The scale of humanity's mobilization was becoming apparent even to those organizing it. Colonel Tim Brooks was responsible for coordinating the embarkation of ground forces onto the new assault carriers. The 1st Colonial Marine Division alone required 40 ships just for transport, and there were dozens of similar units being prepared for deployment. "Sir, we have more volunteers than we can process," reported his aide, Lieutenant Dan Mitchell. "Recruitment centers across Earth and the colonies are reporting that they are running out of space for new applicants." Colonel Brooks looked at the reports streaming across his desk. "How many people want to join the military?" "Last count was over 50 million applications, sir. That is not including the colonial militias who are already mobilizing on their own." The colonial worlds were indeed preparing for war without waiting for orders from Earth. On Mars, the local government had converted the terraforming factories to produce military equipment. The massive atmospheric processors that had been used to create breathable air were retooled to manufacture ship armor plating and weapons components. Commander Larry Johnson was organizing the defense of the outer colonies when he received new orders that surprised him. Instead of preparing defensive positions, he was told to ready his forces for offensive operations. The colonial militias were not going to hide behind their defenses. They were going to join the attack on Zephyrian space. "Sir, my forces are trained for colonial defense," Commander Johnson told Admiral Hayes during their communication. "We do not have experience with large-scale offensive operations." "Commander, your people know what the Zephyrians did to New Haven," Admiral Hayes replied. "They volunteered to make sure it never happens again. Earth Command has confidence that colonial forces will perform admirably when the time comes." The Zephyrian intelligence network was beginning to receive reports that troubled their high command. Long-range sensors detected massive fleet movements throughout human space, but the numbers seemed impossible. No species in galactic history had ever assembled more than a few thousand warships for a single operation. The reports of hundreds of thousands of human vessels had to be sensor errors or exaggerated intelligence. High Admiral Vex, Supreme Commander of the Zephyrian military, reviewed the latest intelligence reports in his command center on the capital world of Zephyr Prime. The holographic display showed estimated human fleet movements, but the scale made no sense to his strategic thinking. These numbers cannot be accurate, High Admiral Vex told his intelligence chief. No civilization maintains that many warships in reserve. The economic cost alone would bankrupt their entire species. Sir, our long-range reconnaissance confirms massive construction activity throughout human space, the intelligence officer replied. Every shipyard, every orbital platform, every manufacturing facility appears to be working at maximum capacity. Then they are building new ships, High Admiral Vex concluded. Primitive vessels to pad their numbers. Quantity cannot overcome our superior technology and tactics. What the Zephyrian leadership failed to understand was that humanity had been preparing for this moment without knowing it. The peaceful decades had allowed human civilization to develop industrial capacity that dwarfed anything in the galaxy. Earth alone could produce more ships in a month than most species built in a century. Captain Nancy White was one of thousands of officers receiving command of new vessels every day. Her battleship, the UES Thunderbolt, was fresh from the construction yards with weapon systems that had been theoretical concepts just weeks ago. As she walked through her ship for the first time, she marveled at the advanced technology that filled every compartment. Captain, your ship is equipped with the new quantum entanglement communication system, her chief engineer explained. You can coordinate with other ships instantaneously across any distance. The enemy will not be able to jam or intercept your communications. Captain White nodded as she examined the tactical displays. And our weapons? Plasma lance batteries that can penetrate any known armor, antimatter torpedoes with adaptive targeting systems, and defensive shields that regenerate faster than they can be depleted, the engineer replied proudly. This ship can engage multiple enemy vessels simultaneously and expect to win. Similar conversations were happening on hundreds of ships every day as humanity's war machine reached full stride. The species that had explored the galaxy peacefully was revealing the industrial and technological power that had made that exploration possible. Shipyards worked around the clock, factories produced weapons at unprecedented rates, and volunteers lined up faster than they could be trained. But perhaps most importantly, humanity was developing something the Zephyrians had never encountered, a unified sense of purpose. Every human in the galaxy understood that New Haven could have been their world, their family, their children. The attack had not just destroyed one colony, it had threatened the entire human way of life. Dr. Carol Mitchell completed the final tests on the stellar conversion device, a weapon so powerful that it required special authorization. The rally point lay in the dark space beyond Pluto's orbit, where the light of Sol was just another star among thousands. For weeks, ships had been arriving at these coordinates, following orders that had been transmitted across human space with the highest priority codes. What began as a few dozen vessels quickly grew into hundreds, then thousands, then numbers that defied comprehension. Admiral Richard Hayes stood on the bridge of the UES Vengeance, the command dreadnought that would coordinate the largest military force in galactic history. Through the massive viewports, he watched as the final squadrons took their positions in formations that stretched across astronomical units. The sight was both beautiful and terrifying, a demonstration of human industrial power that no alien species had ever witnessed. Admiral, the final count is in, reported Commander Steve Parker from his station. 700,000 warships are now in formation and ready for deployment. Admiral Hayes nodded slowly as he absorbed the magnitude of those numbers. 700,000 ships meant over 200 million human military personnel preparing for war. Support vessels brought the total fleet to nearly 1 million ships, making this the largest naval force ever assembled by any species in recorded galactic history. Captain Alex Turner's heavy cruiser, UES Retribution, was positioned in the third battle group, surrounded by ships of every class and configuration. Massive dreadnoughts floated like metal mountains in space, their hulls bristling with weapons that could crack planets. Sleek destroyers darted between the larger vessels like schools of deadly fish. Carrier groups housed millions of fighter craft, each one equipped with technology that surpassed anything in Zephyrian arsenals. Captain, our tactical computers are having difficulty tracking all the ships in our immediate area, reported his tactical officer. The formation extends beyond our sensor range in every direction. Captain Turner activated the fleet-wide tactical display, which showed the position of every vessel in 3 dimensions. The image looked more like a galaxy than a military formation, with spiral arms of ships extending outward from the command center. Each arm contained more firepower than most species possessed in their entire military. The diversity of the fleet was as impressive as its size. Standard battleships and cruisers formed the backbone of the force, but there were also specialized vessels designed for specific roles. The UES Worldbreaker-class dreadnoughts carried weapons capable of shattering planets. The Oracle-class intelligence ships could monitor enemy communications from light years away. The Mercy-class hospital ships were prepared to treat casualties on a scale that matched the fleet's offensive power. Captain Nancy White commanded the battleship squadron designated Alpha 7, consisting of 50 heavy battleships and their escort vessels. Her ships alone carried enough firepower to conquer most star systems, yet they represented less than 1% of the total fleet. The realization of humanity's true military potential was staggering even to those who commanded it. "Captain, we are receiving deployment orders from Fleet Command," her communications officer announced. Alpha 7 is assigned to the primary assault force targeting the Zephyrian capital system. Captain White reviewed the tactical plan on her command screen. The human fleet would divide into 12 major attack groups, each one larger than the entire Zephyrian navy. 6 groups would strike simultaneously at Zephyrian military installations throughout their empire. 3 groups would target their industrial centers and shipyards. 2 groups would secure strategic choke points to prevent escape or reinforcement. The final group would assault Zephyr Prime directly. Commander Larry Johnson led the colonial militia forces aboard the assault carrier, UES Liberation. His troops were volunteers from worlds throughout human space, people who had joined the military specifically to ensure that what happened to New Haven would never happen again. They were farmers, miners, teachers, and shopkeepers who had trained to become soldiers for this single purpose. "Commander, your forces will be responsible for securing Zephyrian population centers after our main battle groups neutralize their military resistance," Admiral Hayes had told him during the final briefing. "Your mission is to ensure civilian safety and establish humanitarian aid centers." The planning for this operation had taken into account every lesson learned from previous conflicts. Humanity would not repeat the Zephyrian mistake of targeting civilians. Enemy soldiers would be defeated, but enemy families would be protected. The goal was not genocide but justice, the removal of a government that had chosen to commit genocide against human civilians. Dr. Carol Mitchell's experimental weapons had been distributed throughout the fleet according to carefully calculated specifications. The quantum disruption arrays were installed on the largest dreadnoughts, capable of tearing apart enemy ships at the molecular level. Gravitational manipulation devices could create artificial gravity wells that would trap entire fleets. The stellar conversion weapons remained locked in special storage, to be used only if the Zephyrians attempted to destroy their own worlds rather than surrender. "Dr. Mitchell, our weapons testing shows effectiveness rates beyond 95% against all known Zephyrian defensive systems," reported the fleet's chief weapons officer. "Their quantum phase shields will be useless against our new technology." The psychological impact of the assembled fleet was already becoming apparent through intelligence reports. Zephyrian long-range sensors had finally confirmed what their leadership had refused to believe. Humanity had assembled a military force that dwarfed anything in galactic history. Panic was spreading through their command structure as admirals and politicians realized they faced an enemy unlike any they had encountered. High Admiral Vex stood in the war room on Zephyr Prime, staring at the holographic display that showed the estimated size and composition of the human fleet. The numbers were so large that his tactical computers had difficulty processing them. 700,000 warships represented more military power than the combined forces of every species in their sector of the galaxy. "Sir, our intelligence analysts believe these numbers must be exaggerated," one of his subordinates reported. "No species could maintain such a large military force without bankrupting their entire civilization." "Then our intelligence analysts are fools," High Admiral Vex replied grimly. "The humans have been peaceful for decades, which allowed them to develop industrial capacity beyond our understanding. We saw their small peacetime fleet and assumed it represented their total military potential. We were wrong." Emergency sessions were being called throughout the Zephyrian Empire as the reality of the situation became clear. Some council members suggested immediate surrender to prevent the destruction of their civilization. Others argued for a desperate first strike against human space before their fleet could launch its attack. A few still believed that Zephyrian technology and tactical experience could overcome human numerical superiority. "We could negotiate," suggested the civilian council leader. "Perhaps offer reparations for the destruction of their colony." "The humans are not interested in negotiations," High Admiral Vex replied. "They have assembled this fleet for one purpose: to ensure that no species ever again considers attacking human civilians. We chose to test their resolve, and now we will face the consequences." Admiral Hayes opened a communication channel to the Zephyrian High Command from his position aboard the UES Vengeance. The message would take several hours to reach Zephyr Prime, but he wanted to give the enemy one final opportunity to prevent unnecessary bloodshed. "High Admiral Vex, this is Admiral Richard Hayes of the United Earth Space Command," he began. "You are receiving this message as the commander of forces responsible for the genocide committed against New Haven Colony. 2.3 million human civilians died because your government chose to test our resolve." The holographic recording showed Admiral Hayes standing on his bridge with the vast human fleet visible through the viewports behind him. "You erased New Haven because you believed humanity would not respond with sufficient force. You calculated that we would accept the loss of one colony rather than risk a larger conflict. Your calculation was incorrect." Admiral Hayes gestured toward the ships filling the space around his command vessel. 700,000 warships now stand ready to demonstrate the true meaning of proportional response. This fleet represents the industrial might of humanity unleashed without restraint. We have come to ensure that the genocide of human civilians never happens again. The message continued with specific terms for Zephyrian surrender. You have 48 hours to respond with an unconditional surrender of all military forces, and the transfer of governmental authority to a coalition of species that will oversee the reconstruction of your civilization. If you choose to fight, you will discover that human patience has limits, but human determination does not. Admiral Hayes ended the recording and transmitted it across all communication frequencies. Within hours, the message was being broadcast throughout Zephyrian space and intercepted by intelligence services across the galaxy. Other species watched in amazement as humanity revealed military capabilities that had been hidden during their peaceful decades. The 48-hour deadline began to count down as the human fleet made FYEO. The 48-hour deadline expired with silence from the Zephyrian Empire. High Admiral Vex had chosen pride over wisdom, believing that his species' military experience and advanced technology could overcome the impossible numbers arrayed against them. It was the final miscalculation in a series of errors that had begun with the destruction of New Haven. Colony Admiral Richard Hayes received the confirmation that no surrender message had been transmitted from Zephyrian space. He stood on the bridge of the UES Vengeance, surrounded by tactical displays showing the positions of 700,000 human warships. The moment had arrived to demonstrate what happened when a species chose genocide against human civilians. "All fleet commanders, this is Admiral Hayes," he announced across the command frequencies. "Operation Final Answer is now authorized. Execute your assigned missions. Show the galaxy that human life is not expendable." Across the vast fleet, ships began moving toward their jump points. The sight was like watching a galaxy come to life as hundreds of thousands of vessels activated their faster-than-light drives simultaneously. Space itself seemed to bend and twist as the largest military force in history departed for Zephyrian territory. Captain Roy Davis commanded the primary assault force targeting Zephyr Prime, the capital world of the Empire that had chosen to test human resolve. His battle group consisted of 50,000 ships, more firepower than most species possessed in their entire military. As his dreadnought UES Justice emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Zephyr system, he saw the enemy fleet waiting for them. "Sir, we are detecting approximately 8,000 Zephyrian warships in defensive formation around their capital world," his tactical officer reported. "They appear to be their entire home fleet." Captain Davis studied the tactical display showing the enemy positions. The Zephyrians had arranged their ships in layered defensive shells around Zephyr Prime, using their most advanced vessels and orbital defense platforms. It was an impressive display of military engineering that would have been formidable against any normal invasion force. "All ships, begin attack formation Omega," Captain Davis ordered. "Remember, our target is the military and government installations. Civilian areas are to be protected. The human ships spread out across the system like a closing net. The Zephyrian defenders opened fire first, their quantum phase weapons creating brilliant displays of energy that lit up the darkness of space. Under normal circumstances, these weapons would have been devastating to any attacking fleet. But the human ships were protected by defensive systems that the Zephyrians had never encountered. The new gravitational shields deflected enemy fire harmlessly into space, while adaptive armor plating absorbed direct hits without damage. Within minutes, it became clear that Zephyrian weapons were nearly useless against human defensive technology. "Sir, enemy fire is having minimal effect on our ships," reported the tactical officer. "Our shields are operating at 98% efficiency." Captain Davis watched as his fleet closed the distance to the enemy formations. "All ships, you are authorized to return fire. Target military vessels only." The human response was overwhelming. Quantum disruption arrays tore through Zephyrian ships like paper, while plasma lance batteries punched holes in enemy armor that their repair systems could not seal. Gravitational compression bombs created localized space distortions that crushed entire squadrons of enemy vessels. The battle was not a contest between equals. It was a demonstration of technological superiority. Meanwhile, similar scenes were playing out across dozens of Zephyrian systems. Captain Nancy White's battleship squadron emerged in the industrial sector of the Empire, where massive shipyards and manufacturing facilities produced the weapons of war. Her 50 ships faced a defending force of nearly 2,000 Zephyrian vessels. "Captain, the enemy is requesting communication," her communications officer announced. "Put them through," Captain White replied. A Zephyrian admiral appeared on the main screen, his alien features showing obvious distress. "Human commander, we wish to discuss terms for the defense of this system." "Admiral, your government chose war when they destroyed New Haven Colony," Captain White replied calmly. "The time for discussion ended 48 hours ago. You may surrender your forces unconditionally, or we will remove them from this system. You cannot expect us to simply give up without fighting," the Zephyrian admiral protested. "You are welcome to fight," Captain White said. "But understand that your weapons cannot penetrate our defenses, while our weapons will destroy your ships completely. The choice is yours." The Zephyrian admiral closed the communication channel and ordered his fleet to attack. Within 30 minutes, his entire force had been eliminated while the human ships sustained no casualties. The industrial facilities were secured by Marine boarding parties who ensured that civilian workers were evacuated safely before the military production centers were destroyed. Commander Larry Johnson led the humanitarian missions that followed the military victories. His colonial militia forces were trained not for destruction, but for reconstruction. As human fleets secured Zephyrian worlds, his teams established medical centers, food distribution points, and temporary shelters for displaced civilians. "Commander, the civilian population appears to be cooperating with our relief efforts," reported one of his lieutenants. "They seem grateful that we are protecting them rather than following their government's example." Commander Johnson nodded as he watched human medics treating injured Zephyrian civilians. "Their leaders chose genocide, but their people are not responsible for those decisions. We will show them what it means to be protected, rather than conquered." Dr. Carol Mitchell monitored the effectiveness of humanity's new weapons from the Fleet Command Center. The quantum disruption arrays were performing exactly as designed, disabling enemy ships without the massive explosions that would endanger nearby civilian populations. The gravitational weapons allowed precise targeting of military installations while leaving surrounding areas undamaged. "Dr. Mitchell, our weapons are proving extremely effective against Zephyrian technology," reported the Fleet Weapons Coordinator. "Enemy casualties are running at 95% while our losses remain at 0. The speed of the human victory surprised even those who had planned it. Within 72 hours of the first attack, organized Zephyrian military resistance had ceased to exist. Every major fleet had been destroyed, every shipyard captured, and every government installation secured. The empire that had ruled this sector of space for over 1,000 years had been dismantled in 3 days. High Admiral Vex found himself trapped in his command bunker on Zephyr. Prime as human Marines surrounded the facility. Captain Davis had personally led the assault on the government complex, ensuring that the architects of genocide would face justice. The underground chambers that had seemed impregnable were no match for human drilling equipment originally designed for asteroid mining. Hi, Admiral Vex. This is Captain Davis of the United Earth Space Command, came the voice through the bunker's communication system. Your military forces have been defeated, and your government facilities are under our control. You have 1 hour to surrender before we begin cutting through your bunker walls. High Admiral Vex looked around at his remaining staff officers, seeing fear and despair in their faces. The communication center showed reports from across the Empire. Every world either captured or abandoned, every fleet destroyed or scattered. The civilization that had seemed so powerful just days ago had been reduced to this single underground room. "Sir, what are your orders?" asked one of his subordinates. High Admiral Vex stood silently for several minutes considering his options. He could fight to the end and die with his pride intact, or he could surrender and face whatever justice the humans demanded. The choice was made easier by the reports of human treatment of Zephyrian civilians, the conquerors, were showing mercy to non-combatants, rather than following the example set at New Haven. "Open a communication channel to the human commander," High Admiral Vex finally ordered. Captain Davis appeared on the screen, his expression hard but not cruel. Behind him, High Admiral Vex could see human soldiers preparing equipment to breach the bunker walls. "High Admiral, have you decided to surrender?" "Captain Davis, I formally surrender all remaining Zephyrian military forces under my command," High Admiral Vex said. "I request that you honor the rules of war regarding prisoners and civilian populations." "High Admiral, your forces will be treated according to the standards of military justice," Captain Davis replied. "Your civilian populations are already under our protection and receiving humanitarian aid. You will be transported to Earth to face trial for the genocide committed against New Haven Colony." The formal surrender was broadcast across Zephyrian space and intercepted by intelligence services throughout the galaxy. Other species watched in amazement as humanity demonstrated both overwhelming military power and unexpected restraint. The conquerors who could have destroyed entire worlds chose instead to rebuild and protect them. Lieutenant Dan Mitchell, son of one of the New Haven colonists, was among the Marines who secured the memorial coordinates where the colony had once existed. He stood in the empty space where his father had died, placing a beacon that would